Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. Welcome to the last lecture of knowledge management course. Today we'll talk about some of the challenges for knowledge management. Although the title of this chapter in the book is Future Challenges, but I believe these are the challenges currently as well. So they are challenges of knowledge management today, and they are challenges for knowledge management in future as well. We'll talk about several issues related to knowledge management, although briefly. So first of all, we'll talk about the political issues regarding internet search engines or information retrieval. We'll also discuss the political issues related with organizational context and the culture. We'll talk about IP issues, the intellectual property, copyright issues. We'll briefly discuss the incentives for knowledge sharing. It's also a tricky issue. It's not easy to decide incentives for knowledge sharing in any organization. We'll touch upon this topic. And finally, we'll talk about some of the hot areas of research in the knowledge management. There are many challenges in knowledge management. Whenever an organization takes up knowledge management and tries to create a culture, a system, or different frameworks of knowledge management in the organization, they face these challenges. The first thing is always a resistance from the existing employees, the people, or how to change the culture of the organization to make it a knowledge sharing culture. Or as you know that culture is the most important thing for every initiative. So until and unless we have a conducive culture, until and unless we have a positive energy in the environment, until and unless the people are willing to share and learn, we cannot have any initiative, we cannot expect it to be successful. So first of all, we need to train the people, we need to develop a conducive culture, and then we can develop all the initiatives and we can convert an organization into a learning organization. So this is one of the major challenges faced by any organization taking up knowledge management initiative. Another challenge in knowledge management is overemphasis of technology. While we cannot deny the importance of technology in knowledge management, in success of knowledge management, however, many organizations they have a misunderstanding that KM is only about technology. So if we develop a knowledge management system, if we provide all the tools and all the software to the people in the organization, we will have a successful knowledge management environment in the organization. No, it is not right. So, as we discussed in the next point, the knowledge management initiatives, they must be firmly grounded in the business goals. Until and unless you have a culture, until and unless you know how to draw benefit from the knowledge management in the form of your business goals, how it can support and enhance your business goals, you cannot expect simply the technology to give you all benefits of knowledge management, right? So we need to change the culture, and we need to strongly associate the knowledge management with the business goals and objectives to have successful KM. Another challenge or misconception is to ignore the dynamic aspect of the content. So some organizations, they will capture all the knowledge in the organization and then they'll forget it. Knowledge is very dynamic. It needs constant evaluation, enhancement, and updation. What we have collected today might not be valid or useful tomorrow in the same organization. So, all the content that is captured, codified, and shared with the people, it needs to constantly be evaluated, enhanced, and updated to remove the obsolete content and to enrich it with the new content, right? And the last challenge is opting for quantity of content over quality. It is very obvious that in knowledge management, it is not about the size. You cannot say like we have captured 1 terabyte of knowledge in the organization. No, it's the quality that matters for knowledge, right? So these are some of the major challenges in knowledge management. The next is the search engines or the information retrieval. We have discussed several times that we are living in the age of information overload. We have too much information out there in the World Wide Web, and finding the useful information from this is really a challenging task. So there's a common misconception that the commercial search engines are objective and they are exhaustive, which means that they do their job completely honestly, they are objective, there is no subjectivity in them, and they are exhaustive. It means a search engine has indexed all the web pages out there on the internet. It is very wrong. Probably you have studied in advanced information system or information retrieval courses that even the major search engines have indexed like maybe 15 to 20%, only 15 to 20% of the entire World Wide Web. So there's a huge amount of information out there that has not been indexed by these search engines. Also, talking about objectivity, that the search engines, they provide you correct, complete, and unbiased results. Many studies have been done and they suggest that search engines automatically exclude certain sites in favor of others, giving prominence to some at the expense of others. And this exclusion, in some cases, it is by design, and in some cases, it is by accident. Like probably you have studied in Advanced Information System course that one of the important, there are many criteria which are used by the search engines to fetch the sites most relevant to the keywords given by the user. Now, there are many criteria which are used by the search engines. So this is the design of the search engine, and because of this search criteria, some websites will be favored instead of some other websites, which means that maybe there's another website, it provides you more up-to-date information, it provides you richer knowledge, but it will be ignored because of some other site. Like, just to give you some example, we have studied in the information retrieval component in advanced information systems that the popular site popularity is one of the main factor in calculating the relevance of the site with the keywords. So a site which is more popular, with which more websites are linked, many websites are pointing to it. So it will have a higher ranking as compared to another website which is not that much popular. So this is the design of the system. Of course, they have tried to make the best possible design, but these design decisions may become flaws of these search engines as well, right? So of course we cannot deny the importance of search engines. They are definitely effective, but they are partially effective at finding the information. An organization which solely relies on search engines to collect the information, maybe they are not doing the right job. So the organization needs to ensure that the best possible content is found, retrieved, and made available to the organization knowledge workers. What do we mean by best possible? It means the most relevant, valid, and up-to-date information should be provided to the knowledge workers of the organization if we want to take benefit from the knowledge management. If we just use search engines to provide all the knowledge to the users, then maybe we need to rethink our policies. Then the second dimension is the context or the culture or the political setup of the organization. There are different models of information politics. We have technocratic utopianism, we have anarchy, feudalism, monarchy, and federalism. Let's talk about these models briefly. Technocratic utopianism, as the name implies, it is mostly focused on technology. It is a heavy technical approach to information management. It stresses categorization and modeling of an organization's full information assets. So the such organizations, they think that if we have completely categorized and modeled all the information assets, we have done enough knowledge management. No, this is not the right thing. Heavy reliance on emerging technologies. So we have many buzzwords, we have many emerging technologies, but these, as we discussed before, that these technologies can be used as enablers. They can enable knowledge management, but they cannot achieve knowledge management alone. So the focus is in detailed corporate data rather than knowledge. So this kind of culture is basically information system driven. It is driven by all the information sources and categorizing and modeling those information sources alone. It is not, as we discussed before, that explicit information sources are also important, but tacit knowledge is the most valuable knowledge in the organization. And if we did not consider the tacit knowledge, we did not really do the knowledge management and do it in the right way. Next is anarchy. As the name implies, anarchy, it is just a mess. There is no overall information management policies. So it is based on the individuals. Individuals are left to their own devices to obtain and manage their own information. So every individual uh, will develop his own strategy and his own way of information management, right? So mostly this model is seen in the startups, and a mature organization will have a clear policy of information management and clear roles of the different people. But mostly in the startups, when the organization has not develop mature processes, we may have this model. The next is feudalism, management of information by individual business units or functions which define their own information needs and report only limited information to the overall corporation. So every unit or function, it is better than the anarchy. At least every unit has developed its own information management policy, but there is no overall corporate strategy. It is one of the most commonly encountered model in the corporate culture. So whoever owns the information, he or she or that department, they control the information. So it is based on the premise of knowledge is power. So nobody is willing to share their knowledge with the other business functions or units in the organization. Next is monarchy, the definition of information categories and reporting structure by firm's leaders who may or may not share the information willingly after having collected. So mostly the CEO or someone empowered by CEO, like you can call him the king, dictates the rule for how information will be managed. So we have one-man show in this organization where one person will make all the rules and for how the information is managed. It is extremely top to down model. Everything flows from the top, the king, to the bottom. It is common in the entrepreneurship profiles, small business owners, or the micromanagers, in which the CEO or anyone at the top is micromanaging everything else in the organization, and same is done for the information sources as well. It is good when the consensus cannot be achieved in an organization, but it is not a very good strategy. A much better strategy is what we call federalism. This is an approach to information management based on consensus and negotiation on the organization's key information elements and reporting structure. So here, this is the most mature model in which all the people have certain consensus and they negotiate, and one policy is developed for all the business units and functions of the organizations. It is a preferred model for most intellectual capital management applications. If you want to really get the benefit from the intellectual capital in the organization, then this is the best model. Use of negotiation to bring potentially competing and non-competing parties together. Of course, different stakeholders may have competing objectives in the organization, but we negotiate and we try to bargain and come to some consensus to develop the information management policy. People with different interests work out among themselves a collective purpose. So everybody is ultimately, all the business units and functions, they are working together to achieve the goals or vision or mission of the organization. So same thing should apply for the information management as well. It requires strong, not really too strong, but it requires a strong central leadership and culture of trust, cooperation, and learning in the organization. And as we said before, that this is the best model to be followed in all organizations. Now, whenever an organization tries to shift to the knowledge-based assets, then there are many challenges that they face. The first is the paradox of the value of the knowledge. It's a well-known paradox for the value of knowledge. The more valuable the knowledge, the harder it is to manage. Well, it's funny, but we have learned that tacit knowledge is the most beneficial and most valuable knowledge, and it is not easy to manage. We have studied in many chapters in this course that tacit knowledge is the hardest to manage. So when the knowledge tends to be tacit, it becomes harder to codify, to share, and preserve, right? So we use a cost-benefit analysis technique to identify and prioritize knowledge that is valuable enough to merit knowledge management. Well, as we discussed before, that test knowledge it is very hard to capture, to codify, to share, to preserve, disseminate to the users. So we try to measure the benefit and cost, or the costs associated with this tacit knowledge, to decide which part of the knowledge should be captured, codified, preserved, and shared. There are many costs associated with the knowledge assets. Let's talk about them briefly. The first is the first kind of cost is to move the knowledge assets, moving knowledge costs. They are incurred by data processing and data transmission. Right? So whenever we are moving the data or information from one to the other business function, location, media, format, and so on and so forth, there is some cost associated with this movement of the knowledge. So this is what the first kind of cost that we need to consider. Next is codification cost. We have studied before in one of the chapters that there are many ways of codifying the knowledge assets. So these costs are considered in the codification cost. When we have acquired the knowledge and now we need to codify it in the form of, let's say, knowledge maps, decision trees, or any other codification scheme. So these costs are there and they must be considered. Next is the abstraction cost arising from generalizing the knowledge over wider problem spaces. So we have discussed before that a knowledge is captured in one context, in one problem space, but it needs to be generalized at more abstract levels so that it can be applied to more problem areas, to more problem spaces. So these costs are called abstraction costs, to generalize the knowledge that has been captured and codified. The next is diffusion costs. They are incurred when communicating with potentially large audiences. So whatever knowledge we have gathered, we need to disseminate it to the concerned stakeholders. These are the diffusion costs. Of course, we need to develop the infrastructure, the bandwidth, the data, the servers, the communication, and so on and so forth. So all these costs, they are covered under the diffusion costs. Next are the absorption costs of getting potential recipients of new knowledge to internalize and familiarize with them. So we need ways of internalizing the knowledge into the knowledge workers through, let's say, distance learning, different courses, trainings, manuals, guidelines, procedures, and so on and so forth. So all of these techniques or the tools, they need certain costs to set up. So absorption costs are related to the cost which are used to internalize the knowledge in the knowledge workers. When they gain the knowledge to be applied in the next phase. Impacting cost, it is related to applying the internalized knowledge in a variety of concrete situations. So once they have internalized it, then they will apply it in their work environment, and there are some costs associated with this application. Next is the knowledge management matrix. Although we have one full chapter, but we have skipped it in this course. So for anything, if we want to measure the benefit of that initiative, we need to be able to measure those benefits. So metrics are used to measure the success or benefit of any knowledge asset. As we discussed before, that there are two things, cost and benefit. Here when we talked about shifting to knowledge based assets, we talk about cost and benefit. So costs have been covered. How to identify the benefit of the knowledge assets? It is done through KM metrics, and they must address not only the information itself but also the business practices and processes that generate the information. So what is the benefit that we are getting from the information itself, and also the business processes and the practices, what kind of and how useful information they are producing. So it will help us in identifying the benefit of the knowledge management in the organization. Organizational context will play a significant role. For example, IBM relies on various measures such as customer satisfaction, time to market, cost evaluation, etc., to measure the utility or the success of the knowledge management. Next is intellectual property issues. We have two main issues. They are actually opposite to each other. One is authorship attribution, and second is unwanted attribution. Let's discuss them briefly. The first is attribution. As we have discussed before, that knowledge is power. So many people, they are afraid of sharing their knowledge in the organization. And when they have shared a knowledge, they fear that they will not get the credit for that sharing. For example, someone developed a best practice or a template or some guidelines or lessons learned through doing the things for many years, and now they are afraid that if they share the knowledge, they will not get credit. Okay, so this knowledge will not be attributed to them, although they have authored the knowledge. So to counter this, the knowledge management should take appropriate steps to ensure that author credits are always connected and therefore move with the knowledge. We have discussed about the role of metadata before as well. So metadata is very important in this regard. Whenever any knowledge is captured, the metadata should be associated with it and it should move with the knowledge. And one of the parts of the metadata is the author of that piece of knowledge. This is how we can counter it. Next is unwanted attribution. This is the opposite of previous. Well, some people are afraid that they will share some knowledge, and because of metadata, this their name will be associated with this piece of knowledge. But with the time, when the information goes out of their hands, it will be modified, it will be watered down, it may become invalid, or it will be modified, and they will feel embarrassed for their name to be associated with that invalid, wrong, or outdated piece of information, right? So someone developed something today, but after 5 years, this thing is no more valid. This piece of knowledge is no more valid, or it has been diluted, or it has been modified. So they will be embarrassed to see their name with this piece of knowledge. So a good strategy is to have proper document management and version control mechanism, so that with every new version, all the changes and who made the changes and what was the reason behind those changes, they should be associated to counter this issue. The next thing in knowledge management is the incentives. Well, the human beings, this is a common weakness of the human beings, that they need some incentive to do the job. Right? Just imagine that if all the companies stop giving payments to the people, will any employee go to that organization for even 1 day, 1 hour? No, not at all, right? So the human psychology, this human psychology of incentives, it pushes them to do the job and to do the job with their best energy, with their best possible efforts. So an incentive is a reward or some form of positive feedback given when a desired behavior is exhibited, right? So when you do something, you are appreciated, you get some reward, you get some benefit, you get some appreciation. So all of these are covered under the incentives. So incentives remain one of the more important challenges facing TM. So just like the human beings need incentive for other things in their lives, it seems reasonable to expect that incentives for knowledge sharing should lead to more sharing of knowledge. So it seems quite obvious and intuitive that if we associate certain incentives with the knowledge sharing, we should expect more people to share their knowledge. However, it is not that easy. It can be quite tricky to get right. Okay? Why? Because others may see as an insult what some perceive as a reward. Just to give you an example, like money. Well, money is a very important motivating factor for many people, but there are people who are above the money thing, for whom money means nothing. Maybe you announce that this much money will be given to the best knowledge sharer in the organization. For someone, it may be a very good incentive, but for someone else, maybe he or she will take it as insult. Should I do this thing for only money? Really? Right? So it's very tricky. Some things they may be perceived as reward by some people, but they may be perceived as insults for the other people. So, as a rule of thumb, the reward should fit the person being rewarded, right? So, for someone, maybe a certificate of appreciation or a souvenir or his mention in the newsletter, it might be more rewarding as compared to a monetary reward. But for some people, maybe it might be fine. So, at a minimum, employees should be allowed to choose their reward from a list of possibilities. So, as one solution to this problem, the organization may have certain rewards and they can give the choice to the employees to choose what they want for their efforts, how they want to be recognized and appreciated. There are three kinds of incentives. Remunerative incentives, they are related with some kind of material reward like money, or let's say a device, a laptop, a gadget, smartphone, or anything, any kind of material reward. Then there are moral incentives like some kind of appreciation, admiration, acknowledgement, right? So the people will have some sense of self-esteem, approval, or admiration. And there are coercive incentives. You can call them like threats. A failure to act in a particular way will result in physical force being used against them, like punishment, firing, etc., etc. So this is like a threat, kind of negative incentive, or we call it coercive incentive. You are really coercing the people. So there are many risks in the incentives, like the people, they can misuse the incentives. Like in your textbook, you read many stories like many organizations in late 1900s or early 2000s, they announced huge incentives for their CEOs in the form of stocks or bonuses in the organization, and they really misused it in the form of fake sales and so on and so forth. So as we said before, that incentives can be really tricky thing in the organization. So you need to be careful that this incentive will not be misused by the employees. Another risk is possibility of cutthroat environment. In some organizations they announced the incentives, and the environment it became so selfish and cutthroat that the people, they were not willing, even in an example you read in the book, that the people would, it is a real example from a real organization, that the people would fear leaving their desktop unlocked, that someone will get the information from their machine, and they 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 will like, they will not get the reward, or they will get important information and they will get the reward that I should have gotten, right? So it creates a very selfish kind of, it may create selfish environment or cutthroat environment, in which the employees, they will be concerned only and only about themselves. Although the purpose of knowledge sharing is to develop a more kind of collaborative and conducive environment, so that everybody is helping the other people. And also it may develop fear in the minds of the people, as we discussed before, that coercive incentives, if someone is using these kind of incentives, then they will develop fear in the minds of employees, which is not good ultimately for the organization. These are some of the common incentives used by the organization, but again, the every organization should pick the incentives which are best fitting for the organization itself and for the people being rewarded. The last thing is the KM research. We'll not go into detail, but these are some of the hot topics in the knowledge management research. And again, many of you will be starting your research in the next semester as graduation project or as thesis. So some of these topics can be potentially good topics for you. Please go through all these topics and take them as basic research questions that can help you in formulating your research and the goals for your graduation project. So you can go through these topics, and you can see if you get inspired by them. You can work on them as any course project, or even as graduation project or thesis in the next semester. At the end, we will have some concluding thoughts. In 1998, the Gartner Group report on KM stated that knowledge management will be standard way of running businesses in the near future. Well, it is still not there, but this domain, this discipline, it is making huge progress, and we have learned several aspects of knowledge management, and I hope now you can understand that KM demonstrates that it can help build a solid foundation to improve operational efficiencies and catalyze the innovative work practices in any organization. If the knowledge management is applied properly, if there is good thought put behind knowledge management, and the right tools, right techniques, frameworks, and the hardware and software they are selected, it can really help improving the organization in terms of offering new products, new services, improving the existing products, developing a good sharing, enhancing knowledge, enhancing culture, and innovative culture in the organization. With these concluding thought, we will close the course. Alhamdulillah, we have completed the knowledge management course. That is the end of the last lecture of the course.